Any vice president could have the power to unilaterally accept, reject, change, or halt the counting of electoral votes is antithetical to our constitutional structure and basic democratic principles.
It unambiguously clarifies that the vice president is prohibited. And I repeat, it clarifies that the vice president, whoever he or she may be, is prohibited from interfering with electoral votes. We were all there on January 6th. That happened. That was for real. It was not a visit by friends from back home. And we have a duty responsibility to make sure it never happens again.
Yeah, Senator Susan Collins and Joe Manchin are urging the quick passage of the Bipartisan Electoral Count Reform Act, which would update the 19th century law that former President Donald Trump tried to exploit in an attempt to overturn the 2020 election. The Republican and Democratic senators testified yesterday before the Senate Rules and Administration Committee, saying they desperately need to close the loopholes in the 1887 statute. Joining us now, former White House counsel to President Obama and senior advisor to Joe Biden's presidential campaign, Bob Bauer. He is currently a professor at NYU School of Law and recently testified on the Electoral College Reform Act. Also with us, Harvard Law School professor and former assistant attorney general under George W. Bush, Jack Goldsmith. They are co-founders of Lawfare, leaders of the Presidential Reform Act. Bob Bauer, I'll start with you. You testified yesterday, I believe, and you talk about how this reform is really an urgent situation. Can you explain why?
Yes, as you said in your intro, Mika, this statute is 135 years old. It's always been a sort of loaded weapon lying on the desk, if you will. It's poorly worded. It's subject to vast misinterpretation, as we've seen, and dangerous and mischievous and malicious misinterpretation. And so the time has clearly come to reform it now that these dangers are clearly exposed. And there is a path forward here. And the bipartisan group produced an Electoral Count Reform Act, which was the subject of the hearing yesterday. And what is extraordinary is how much widespread bipartisan support it has received. Its fundamental design is right on target. And in many respects, it accomplishes two things, and I'll close there. One is it prevents majorities in the Congress or in the states from seeking to overturn the outcome of lawful elections that reflect the popular vote. And secondly, it clarifies Congress's role in the January 6th session, going to issues like the one you cited, that is to say that the vice president's role is purely ministerial. So there is clearly a path forward here with much bipartisan support.
It seems, Jack Goldsmith, like maybe this should have been done a long time ago. How does this shore up our elections, and how did Trump try to exploit the existing situation statutes?
There were two essential ways, two essential flaws. There are many flaws revealed in the old law, the 19th century law you referred to, that were tried to be exploited in the 2020 election. There were lots of efforts, but two were to get the vice president to try to count votes in the sense of deciding which votes should be counted and to make substantive decisions about which electors to count. The second was there was an effort to send several different slates from the states other than slates of electors other than the ones that were actually chosen pursuant to the vote. This bill would directly address both of those issues. As Bob said, the main core of the bill is, and it seems so simple and obvious, the main core of the bill is to make sure that the vote that took place on Election Day by the voters is the one that gets respected in the presidential count. And this does this by eliminating, through various processes, the idea that you can send more than one slate. It makes clear which slate is the right slate and the one Congress should count. And it also makes clear that the vice president's role is ministerial and that he doesn't have these broader responsibilities that the Trump team was pushing on Vice President Pence.
Bob, obviously the urgency of this effort is intensified, not just because of January 6th, but because of some of the candidates we've seen elected even just a couple of days ago in places like Arizona, Michigan, perhaps in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, who have said just openly that they believe that the 2020 election was rigged and that if they'd been in position of power, they would have somehow flipped the results. So my question to you is, What kind of support are you seeing in the Congress? It's hard to imagine someone opposing this, except for the fact that so many Republicans support what Donald Trump tried to do in 2020.
In the matter of Electoral Count Act reform, there actually is a remarkable show of both Democratic and Republican support. I think there's a recognition that this statute, while it's one piece of the overall task of protecting our elections, is a critical piece, and it's within Congress's power to do something about it and to do something about it before the next presidential election cycle. At most, what we've heard are suggestions for some clarifications and technical corrections to what the bipartisan group produced. But the fundamental design that we're describing here and that Jack just reviewed is a design that just has, again, a remarkable amount of support. The hearing yesterday was exceptional in underscoring the Democrat-Republican nonpartisan support that this design has drawn.
Professor Goldsmith, in listening to this conversation this morning and reading about the Reform Act and thinking about the Reform Act as it's been discussed now for weeks, months actually, it is amazing that we haven't had a crisis before this. I'm thinking about 1960 or the year 2000, both contested elections but were uncontested, and the winner became president of the United States. But what do you think about the Reform Act today in Congress when you have elected officials, as Willie just sort of pointed out, elected officials who still only reluctantly concede that Joseph R. Biden was elected president of the United States?
Well, first of all, to your point about the history of the act, it could have gone off the rails at any point in the past, and there have been problems with it in the past, and they've been growing, and they became much more obvious in 2020. As for people who take various views about the validity of the last election, I mean, this law is aimed in ensuring, as I said earlier, that despite people's attitudes in Congress or in the states about what should have happened with the vote, it takes extraordinary steps to make sure that the actual vote that was made in the states gets reflected in the presidential electors who vote for the president as reflected by what the people chose, and that efforts to deny that are checked. That's what this bill tries to do in a variety of ways, and I think it succeeds remarkably well.
Hey, Bob, I'm going to do a dangerous thing and share some of Donald Trump's thinking. He has argued that the very fact that Congress is trying to address this law, change this law, is proof that Trump/Pence really had the authority, the legal authority, to change the election results on January 6th, to overturn the certification process. What is your response to that argument?
Well, setting aside the question of whether Donald Trump possesses the training, the credentials, and for that matter, has made a good faith effort to understand this law, just setting that all aside, I can only say that he is in a minority, an extreme minority. The better part of the views, by far, across the entire spectrum of legal scholarship of those who are really familiar with the statute, is that that's completely wrong. And of course, when Congress turns around and looks at a statute like this and attempts to make adjustments of various kinds to absolutely clarify what its intent was, that doesn't mean that its intent was very different before the clarifications were made. And so I'd have to say that he's really alone in that view, certainly alone in that view among anyone who has any knowledge of the statute, its history, and the better part of interpretation on all sides of the political spectrum.